Georgie and Mandy's first marriage. George Sr. replacement is perfect after young Sheldon. Georgie and Mandy's first marriage has set up a perfect replacement for George Sr., who died in the penultimate episode of Young Sheldon. This new Young Sheldon spin-off follows Georgie and Mandy as they begin married life with baby Cece following the end of Young Sheldon. Mandy was originally introduced in Season 5 of Young Sheldon, and at the end of that season, she and Georgie learned she was pregnant. The two ultimately ended up together and were living with Georgie's Meemaw during Young Sheldon Season 7. Young Sheldon took a tragic turn in the penultimate episode of the series when George Sr. suffered a fatal heart attack, leaving the family to deal with the fallout of his sudden death. Georgie seemed to become the glue holding the family together, which might be one explanation for Georgie and Mandy's first marriage's weird title, which alludes to the fact that the couple will eventually divorce. However, Georgie and Mandy will be living in the McAllister home during the first season, which gives Georgie plenty of opportunities to interact with a character who takes his father's place in his life. How Jim, Mandy's dad, replaces George Sr. in Georgie and Mandy's first marriage. The Season 1 trailer suggests he and Georgie will get closer. Georgie and George Sr. both had a good relationship with Jim McAllister in Young Sheldon. Jim often seemed like a kindred spirit to George Sr., and the men often spent time together complaining about their wives and drinking beer. Additionally, Jim was more accepting of Georgie than his wife was, and offered him a job in his tire shop, suggesting he was treating him as a son now that Georgie and Mandy were together. Thus, it is unsurprising that Jim will be a replacement father figure for Georgie and Mandy's first marriage. Georgie and Mandy will now be living with the McAllisters, which gives Georgie a chance to get closer with Jim. Jim's similar personality to George and his interest in his son-in-law will make it easy for him and Georgie to get close. Clips in the trailer also suggest that Jim will take Georgie's side against his wife, at least to an extent, although he will continue to be conflict-averse and to walk away when Mandy tries to confront her mother about her non-acceptance of Georgie. Jim McAllister's role was needed after George's death in Young Sheldon. Georgie needs a father figure to look up to. Georgie was still a teenager when he accidentally impregnated Mandy, and it was only 2 years later that George Sr. died. Thus, he is still in a stage of life where he needs and wants fatherly guidance, especially now that he is a new father himself. During the last few episodes of Young Sheldon, Georgie had been turning to his parents for that advice, but George Sr.'s sudden death turned everyone's lives upside down and left Georgie in a position where he had to look after his mother and younger sister while trying to parent an infant with Mandy, making him even more in need of a father figure. Jim is similar enough to Georgie's father that he can step into that role easily, but is also different enough from him that Georgie will always be reminded that his own father is gone. Georgie's new closeness with Jim will thus be extremely poignant. Jim is similar enough to Georgie's father that he can step into that role easily, but is also different enough from him that Georgie will always be reminded that his own father is gone. This could add an emotional undercurrent to Georgie and Mandy's first marriage that elevates it from a standard sitcom to a comedy drama, despite the fact that this series utilizes a laugh track. How Jim will be different from George Sr. He takes a greater interest in Georgie. Although Jim and George have similar personalities, that doesn't make them exactly the same, which will add to the poignancy of Jim's relationship with Georgie. Significantly, Jim has already shown far more interest in Georgie and his life than George Sr. did. Although George Sr. encouraged his son to play football in the early seasons of Young Sheldon, which allowed them to spend a lot of time together, he didn't give his eldest son much support or attention otherwise. Thus, Jim's interest in Georgie as a person underscores the fact that Georgie's longing for a real relationship with his father had never come to fruition. In young Sheldon, Georgie was the butt of many jokes in his family, as the Coopers saw him as the dumb one, while Sheldon was a genius. Jim McAllister's defense of Georgie, particularly in a scene in the trailer where he stands up to Audrey calling Georgie dumb, will be a refreshing change in Georgie and Mandy's first marriage. However, it will also be heartbreaking because Georgie will realize his father is not there to be proud of him or support him the way Jim does.